Swastika, namaste. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin the actual panel, we're going to do some prayers that are connected with our traditions. So, Dr. Nakagaki.
Okay. So I would like to start with the kind of Buddhist reading. At the same time, we said swasti, as the Nikunji mentioned swasti. It comes from the swastika, but it's like a greeting that we try to use as something, become more familiar with the words. Swasti as a greeting. So swasti to you all, and so maybe we can even repeat swasti. To begin with.
After.
So that will become a little prayer for today. Okay. So maybe I'll ring the bell. And so please calm down your mind and you set up yourself to be ready for a session today. Swasti.
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 Swasti. From the swastika, diamond-like adornments in Buddha's heart, spread a great bright light from the Garland Sutra, from the Buddhist text.
Grandmother Patricia, would you like to say a quick prayer before we start?
Kudo, Hojo, Doli, Nalsam, Ima, Jonah, Yudhishthir, Shaitan, Hashjel, Hoan, Ahir, Shajah, Shaitan, Dian, and Ashir, Mishlan. Shada'a, Nahakos. Erholen, do in Sahakes, Ille, in Sahakes, Ab, Bezir, Hojoji, Ina, do, Sehasen, Hojo, Nasha, Dole, Hojona, Askli, Hojona, Skli, Hojo, Nahaskli, Hojo, Nahaskli.
A Hindu prayer that may we exchange knowledge without quarreling, may we exchange knowledge without ego, may we exchange knowledge without any obstacles. Om Sahana Lavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu. Swasti and Namaste. On behalf of the Swastika Awareness Coalition, as well as the founding members, such as the Coalition of Hindus of North America, the Highway Foundation for Peace and Reconciliation, United States Hindu Alliance, and the Buddhist Council of New York, I welcome you all to today's session. The Swastika Awareness Coalition comprises spiritual, religious, and community organizations from the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, and Native American traditions. SAC aims to create greater awareness and education around the sacred swastika and distinguish it from the hateful Nazi symbol of the Hakenkreuz, or the hooked cross, through various initiatives, events, educational programs, and interreligious dialogues. You can check out the website at www.understandingswastika.org. The swastika is one of the most ancient and sacred symbols, over 10,000 years old and currently used by nearly 2 billion followers of the dharmic traditions of the world, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, along with similarly sacred symbols used by the Zoroastrian, Native American, Canadian First Nation, and ancient African traditions. In many instances, the swastika, a Sanskrit word which literally means all that is good, has been misunderstood and maligned in the West by equating it with the Nazi symbol used by Hitler. This is a false association. Hitler was not inspired by Eastern symbolism and the form of swastika, but adopted and misappropriated a new crusade cross for Nazi Germany, which he referred to as the Hakenkreuz, or translated as the hooked cross in English, in association with anti-Semitism. The mistranslation and false association of the Hakenkreuz with the swastika has resulted in injustice towards the nearly 2 billion followers of the dharmic and other native traditions and who consider swastika and similar symbols like the manji or the whirling log, etc., as sacred, peaceful, and auspicious. We recognize and acknowledge the transgenerational trauma of the 6 million Jews, 1.5 million Romas, and others killed by Nazi persecution, and the chilling, intimidating effect of Nazi-inspired hatred of Jewish Americans, African Americans, and others even today. Hindus and Sikhs have also been targets of neo-Nazis and those who support Nazi ideology. Yet, the important work of fighting bigotry and racism must not inadvertently stoke resentment against other religious minorities and traditions. It is imperative that we equip our children with proper knowledge about world cultures and religions so that they can develop the mutual respect and pluralism that must be the cornerstone of any multiracial, multi-ethnic, and inclusive society. In October of 2022, spiritual leaders from the Buddhist, Hindu, and the Native American traditions signed a historic swastika proclamation to formalize a common understanding of the swastika amongst these communities, while standing in solidarity with the Jewish community and calling for greater education and efforts to distinguish between the sacred swastika and the hateful Hakenkreuz. It is a very important document that will be used as our united voice to the public, government, media, and society in general. The proclamation holds not only a historic significance because it is first of its kind, but also an important historic significance in the United States. In February of 1940, thanks to the prevalent misinformation and the environment in the United States at that time, leaders of 4 Native American nations signed a proclamation saying that they would no longer use a swastika in their sacred art. The proclamation read, "Because the above ornament, which has been a symbol of friendship amongst our forefathers for many centuries, has been desecrated recently by another nations of peoples, therefore it is resolved that henceforth from this day on and forever our tribes renounce the use of the emblem commonly known as the swastika or philpot on our blankets, baskets, and objects, sand paintings, and clothing." The fact that a set of religious communities were forced to renounce their sacred symbol based on misinformation is simply unacceptable and against their fundamental religious and civil rights. 82 years later, I am happy to see that in 2022, leaders of Native American communities joined those in the dharmic communities in affirming the sacredness of the swastika and their religious rights by condemning bigotry and intolerance. Hindus have also welcomed the Jewish community for over 2,000 years. I have a personal story to share. The Hindu Maharaja, or king, Digvijay Singh Ranjit Singh Ji Jadeja, or known as Sahiba Jam Sahib, from my ancestral town of Jamnagar, and he's also known as the Indian Oscar Schindler, raised 600,000 rupees between 1942 and 1945 to build a camp that sponsored 1,000 Jewish and Christian children escaping persecution and hardship during World War II Poland. The camp had more than 60 buildings, including a chapel, laundry rooms, a stage to hold Polish culture programs, a community center to hold Saturday evening dances, plus sports grounds, and much more. In addition, there have been active dialogues between the Hindu and Jewish communities starting from the 2008-2009 Hindu-Jewish summits, which was a good start to creating a common understanding about the sacred swastika while denouncing bigotry, hatred, and anti-Semitism. The summits also announced that they also denounced the racist Aryan invasion theory that has been taught in academia and in the mainstream. Context matters and words matter, folks. Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, or other traditions use this symbol in specific sacred and spiritual ways and will never desecrate a Jewish synagogue, cemetery, etc. with their sacred symbols. But those who peddle bigotry and hate will draw a Nazi Hakenkreuz or hooked cross to create fear and trauma. Ironically, in 2015, a Hindu temple in the Seattle area was vandalized with a Nazi Hakenkreuz and the words, "Get out." Today, many in America can distinguish between the sacred cross on a church or in a cemetery and the hateful burning cross. Then why can't we develop a similar nuance and understanding about the swastika versus the Nazi Hakenkreuz or the hooked cross? With that, I'm going to read our proclamation, which was signed in October of 2022, and you can find a copy of it right over there. We, the undersigned, hereby jointly proclaim the following statements on the swastika symbol. Whereas we seek a more truthful and peaceful world based on mutual respect and mutual understanding with compassion, love, and wisdom in spirit, and whereas we affirm the fact that the swastika has long been a symbol of auspiciousness, peace, good fortune, and prosperity, and whereas we recognize that by wrongly associating the sacred symbol with the Nazi symbol of hate, enormous harm is being done to more than 2 billion Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and other indigenous people who continue to use the sacred swastika with reverence and respect worldwide. And whereas we acknowledge that in the 20th century in Europe, Hitler and his Nazi party used the symbol of the Hakenkreuz, hooked cross, which is wrongly translated as the swastika, into a symbol of hate and genocide in the Western world, and that Hitler never called it swastika. And whereas we understand Haken, which is hooked, plus Kreuz equals cross, is a German word and a type of Christian cross in the West, while on the other hand, Su, which means good, and Asti, which means to be, and Ka, which is the noun form, is a Sanskrit word and an auspicious dharmic symbol having a history of over 10,000 years. And whereas we assert upon historical records that the two symbols, that of the Hakenkreuz and the swastika, have completely different meanings, usage, and context, and that this distinction must be made clear and unambiguous despite the apparent similarity of their shapes and presentation. And whereas we understand and acknowledge the pain, persecution, suffering resulting from the genocide of 6 million Jews and 1.5 million Roma and others at the hands of the Nazis. Whereas we understand that various neo-Nazi, supremacist, and hate groups continue to use the Nazi symbol to dehumanize those who are society's most vulnerable members. And whereas we stand together in solidarity with the Jewish people in condemning acts of violence and hate carried out under the Hakenkreuz, or hook cross symbol. And whereas we affirm that we are determined in the spirit of a collective humanity to bring forth the true meaning of the swastika in its traditional and auspicious spirit, so that the swastika can be freely used without any fear or misunderstanding. And now therefore be resolved that we shall use our best efforts to ensure that the world shall henceforth recognize the true meaning of the word swastika as a sacred symbol, and encourage the use of the correct word, Hakenkreuz, or hooked cross, to refer to the anti-Semitic hate symbol. And we shall recognize that in this globalized world, there is a need to provide accurate information and education regarding the larger history and usage of the swastika, as differentiated from the Hakenkreuz. And we shall encourage all nations, in particular those in media, education, and government, to use resources recommended by the Swastika Awareness Coalition at www.understandingswastika.org as a comprehensive source of reference to understand the swastika and its equivalent symbols in the dharmic and other indigenous traditions worldwide. This was signed by different spiritual leaders on October 16th, 2022. So that is our swastika proclamation. And today we'll provide some context behind it, but also a conversation about what it is, what it means to different symbols. And what I'm going to do is we're going to skip the long intros, so I'm just going to continue right into the panel. And I would like to invite Jeff Kelman as the first speaker for his opening comments and presentation. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Nikunj. I appreciate that very much. And I'd always like to be amongst friends for this particular subject matter here. I think it's something that I could easily talk about for hours. And it was one of those pieces of subject matter where sometimes you look for it, other times it looks for you. And in this case, it was more the latter. When I put together my master's thesis in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Graz College, I ultimately wrote about the swastika, the Hakenkreuz, and the Christian cross. But ultimately, we're going to be focusing mostly here on the swastika and Hakenkreuz, as I named this talk. One shape, two symbols. And I'll be moving pretty quickly, because again, this is normally much longer, so don't want to hold questions to the end. All right, so as you can see here on the left, symbols matter. Symbols matter a whole lot. You can have a shape, just words in terms of everything we're talking about. A shape is just a form in space. But the moment it takes on meaning, it becomes a symbol, right? If we have a symbol here on the left, such as a common Latin cross type necklace, then this is a cross. And on the right, we have a cross of St. Peter, or even termed a satanic cross. It's taking the same shape, but it has a completely different meaning. Words matter, of course, as well. In terms of, we have on the left sugar, we have on the right salt. They look very similar, but their substance is altogether quite different. We know this in terms of their makeup. Throughout the course of this talk, I'm going to be using a few different words, and I want you to be on the same page with how I'm using them. When I talk about the swastika, I'm using this in an auspicious or positive sense. When I say Hakenkreuz, this is in a negative context, a hateful context. It does not always refer to how I use it to mean a Hitler-specific symbol, but really a symbol of hate derivative thereof. So it could look a little different, could have a similar color scheme, but it's going to look similar there. And then I think it's important, my colleagues here don't always use this other third term, but I think it's important to introduce a term as well, just for the shape itself. So if you're talking about just the shape in strictly aesthetic, artistic terms or something else, you might see, around the crown molding of some, of these old buildings, even in Chicago, that I would just call a Gamadian, which is actually what, much of the West referred to this shape, not the symbol, dating back to the 1800s. And that comes from the Greek letter gamma, just 4 of them put together there. All right. Now, right out the gate, it's really important to understand that Hitler himself only ever called that there a Hakenkreuz. Never ever was it a swastika or anything else. This is taken directly from the earliest English translation of Mein Kampf, also translated at the time as My Battle, My Struggle, My Battle, Mein Kampf. And this is a hit, and I quote directly from Hitler in this book. After innumerable trials, I settled upon a final form. A flag having a red ground with a white disc in it, bearing on its center a black hooked cross. Okay, and I'll talk about a little bit more about the different translations of that from the various iterations of Mein Kampf in a moment. The Nazis only ever called the symbol a Hakenkreuz. And even Germans today, amongst your average German walking around the streets or up through academia, refer to the symbol as a Hakenkreuz. There are laws in Germany, of course, that actually ban the use of this and have some carve-outs for a swastika used by Hindus or others. So there's that distinction made even where this originally came from. And I just add, if you have more than one of them in the German, they call it Hakenkreuz. So if you hear that, that's just the plural. But for various potential reasons, and we can get into that in a moment as well, we in the West here largely call it a swastika no matter what you're looking at in terms of that shape, whatever symbolic meaning it's imbued with. So from popular documentaries to popular books on the subject to whenever a symbol is wrongly or illegally or otherwise etched onto tombstones or on a synagogue, it's almost always simply referred to as a swastika. Very recently, in some small contexts, we might be seeing this change, but in general, that's how it's been to date. This is failing to make any distinction, as it's made in these other countries, between swastikas and Hakenkreuz, which, as you can see here, there's a few different images that present what happens oftentimes when you do try to control for this a little bit, in too centralized of a fashion, in too forceful of a fashion. You actually, get people to start using similar color schemes and similar other looking images as well. Now, our technology as well mistranslates Hakenkreuz as swastika. If you were to Google right now, Haken, you get hook, okay? Kreuz, cross. So far, so good. Then you put them together, Hakenkreuz, and you get swastika. So something seems amiss there. Something's wrong. If you similarly, use different search engines, it doesn't really matter. Throughout the English language, Bing or Google or all these different things here. You look up swastika, and we have an ancient symbol in the form of an equal armed cross, with each arm continued at a right angle, used in clockwise form as the emblem of the German Nazi Party. So, yet again, it does use the word cross there, but it's mismashing it. There isn't this clear distinction being made. I'm going to go through a rapid-fire history of the swastika as well here. We're first looking at the word of swastika. This is borrowed, of course, from Sanskrit, in English there, when and where it's used. Nasu, the good, asti, it's the verbal abstract of the root of the verb to be, and ka is the diminutive suffix there. So that effectively just makes it almost a good in a little sense, like a lucky charm in some ways almost. This was a ubiquitous symbol across history, in the East and West. And from around 1933 onwards in the West, it often referred specifically to a version used by the Nazis, translated as the hook cross. And now in the East, the swastika and Hakenkreuz are seen as separate and distinct. One's love and the other of hate. Now this image is taken from a book that I got specifically for my research as well. It's a really rare old collectible from 1894, commissioned by the early days of the Smithsonian. And this is written by Thomas Wilson, called just The Swastika. And this shows, if you can see that there, that the swastika, even then, was found historically all around the world. We see some throughout Latin America, India, of course, parts of Africa, all through Europe, and then, even in other parts of the world as well. This is an ancient swastika mosaic on the floor of a synagogue in ancient Israel that have been found. These are some Buddhist swastikas, and I'm not going to go too much into the Buddhist, Jain, Hindu, or anything else there. I'm just going to touch on some of those because some of my colleagues here will go into greater detail on that front. But the Hindu swastika, beside the Om, Jain swastika is clearly ancient and sacred as well. And now swastikas in the West, in the pre-Nazi era, were essentially ubiquitous. So these are all items that throughout my research I've actually been able to acquire to firsthand make sure that I saw all of this. And we found that there were swastikas used essentially, again, as a lucky charm almost, but as you can see in some of these images, beside a four-leaf clover or a horseshoe, or a wishbone, just various other more stereotypical Western images of good luck. It was on all these different images. On playing cards as well. Even Coca-Cola used the swastika for its trinkets of good fortune. And Jewish businesses are absolutely no exception. So I have a number of different of these same style coins that here's Ben J. Goldstein's throughout the Midwest. Greenberg's here, similar good luck, as you can see beside these other symbols. This Rosenblum's, various clothing stores and what have you. Now the next image I'm going to show you is probably one of the most interesting that I was able to acquire. This shows that it was not just the symbol, but even the word itself had an auspicious connotation. And this is even associated with here, what you might call a Magen David or a Star of David there. It might have just been a more generalized six-pointed star, but it even says the swastika in that same context from this 1920s period in the United States. Now here, this piece now I'm going to address really is probably some of the most important aspects of where everything went wrong. And one of the reasons I love this topic so much is it's one of those things where sometimes you look at history, there's lots of different points of view, and you can kind of agree to disagree. Frankly, I think this is something where if you come to terms with the historical understanding, with what we're about to get into as well, then it is something where it's fairly clear cut. And at the end of the day, it makes it easy to say, okay, here's an easy piece of good that we can do quite quickly if we just look at this more accurately. So here's two copies of Mein Kampf I have here. One is my Battle original translation from E.T.S. Dugdale, and the other is the more popular Ralph Manheim one as of now. The first translation of Mein Kampf from 1933 translated it as hooked cross. A later edition from 1943, translated by Ralph Manheim, used the word swastika instead. We can, again, during the Q&A, get into perhaps some of the reasonings behind this, and there's some speculative thought, but at the moment we'll just go through what was. Also, around pre-March 1933, there was a New York Times article that referred to the Nazis as Hakenkreuzlers, in the same way that you might refer to people from Berlin as Berliners. In March 1933, though, a New York Times piece mentioned swastika after this as the symbol of the Nazis. And again, we can get into that a little bit more later. Now, why does it matter that we understand all of this historically and in terms of looking at the two symbols, understand them as exactly that, two symbols, and make a distinction? Showing here that the swastika is not a Hakenkreuz. Well, as has been mentioned, there's millions, if not billions, of Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, and indigenous persons that do use this symbol as the preeminent symbol of their faith. Holocaust survivors I've personally spoken to in Jewish groups After going through a talk, initially they're a little bit jarred just seeing the title of the talk. But after we've gone through it and after they've heard more about it, the reception has been nearly universally positive. And I have a quote at the end of this that comes directly from a Holocaust survivor on the topic. But many believe that healing requires acknowledging the past, but also understanding it properly in order to fully heal. And distinguishing these two symbols creates that healing power for those harmed by the Hakenkreuz, as well as disarming that power of hate. So often we'll find that when you do not go about this path, you actually arm those who are trying to use this and create a bit of a problem. Ultimately, beyond that as well, from simply a historian standpoint, this is the accurate way of framing it and talking about these symbols. If there was a mistranslation, then a mistranslation ought to be corrected for. Additional harms that are important to point out involve a self-censorship that goes on within various different communities. You could be named Swastika as a Hindu girl, and if you're growing up in the West in various different areas, there's a variety of different bullying that you could encounter, or perhaps just want to call yourself something else because of this misunderstanding throughout history that's currently perpetuated. Additionally, and this is another important point, is that there's a whitewashing of the historical connection of the Christian cross. There's no doubt that Hitler did understand that he was calling it a hooked cross in his language. He was raised a Catholic, so was Himmler and Heydrich and many of the other leadership of the Third Reich. And a couple were Protestants as well there, but many were Catholic and other forms of Christian. And they understood, or at the very least wanted to believe, that they were the next Crusaders. They were the next Knights Templar with this cross emblazoned, just like the Crusaders would have on their shields. And the Crusaders would have, absolutely, it would have not been lost on them that a sword was the shape of a cross. There was no doubt that Hitler believed he was taking up that mantle and continuing that forward. The Hakenkreuz as well, we believe we see, I'd like to see more data and studies on this. It's a little bit difficult to sample, but use actually seems to go down if you have multiple meanings. So when you make this distinction, as is made in India, for example, it doesn't make sense to put a shape of a Gamadian on a synagogue when everywhere in the culture around you uses that as a good luck symbol. You don't want to wish good luck to people that you hate. Now, how can you tell you're looking at a Hakenkreuz? If we've gone through this, this rapid fire rate, again, we could do this in much longer form. But how can you tell you're looking at one or the other? This is where, yes, context is absolutely key. If it's written on a doorway, on a mezuzah scroll, as we see here, which is on Jewish door frames, or in any of these other contexts here, immediately, there's no debate. This is a Hakenkreuz, each and every time. If it's used auspiciously, and this is actually my 11-year-old son's hand. We had some Hindu friends that they put it emblazoned on the front of a motorcycle for good luck and safe passage. My son went over and said, "Oh, Dad, what's this? This looks cool." And I was able to then use that as a teaching experience for him on that motorcycle right there. So again, this is where we can see this is used for good, and thus as a swastika. So beyond that, some questions that I think this general sort of talk introduces is, if the swastika was normalized in the West, as it is in some other places, what does this mean for different communities? I'm not going to necessarily just answer all of these things here. We can do that later. And for the Jewish community and Holocaust survivors in particular, some of the interests that have a specific view to perhaps keep the status quo, I think when informed of a lot of what we've gone over very quickly, tend to think, there is perhaps less to fear here, and there's more, perhaps even safety to come from the fact that we look at this holistically and correctly. Not to mention the fact that we actually allow then to remove for the self-censorship to the various communities we've spoken to. And I'm sorry if I've left out also quite a bit about the indigenous communities that also look at this. I've been trying to condense this a bit. Neo-Nazi use of the symbol does change, as I mentioned there. We don't want to make a forbidden fruit. What we've seen in other countries sometimes when they do try to move towards a ban is you can have something that looks very similar and that derives a lot of the same power for these forces of hate, but you passed a law, you feel good, you feel, okay, well, we were able to control something a little bit further, but you didn't actually stop anything. In fact, you might have made it worse because now you've energized those forces of hate there. So what can we do specifically today forward? This is, I think, one of the easiest things about this sort of talk, is it's extremely easy. Right now, once you leave that door, you can start using both words. When you see a swastika, you can call it a swastika. When you see a Hakenkreuz, you can call it a Hakenkreuz. You can host these sort of interreligious events. You can attend Parliament of the World's Religions. There's a book I'd recommend of my good friend and colleague at the end over there, The Buddhist Swastika and Hitler's Cross, Rescuing a Symbol of Peace from the Forces of Hate, written by T.K. Nakagaki. This goes through longer form a lot of what I've discussed. It has a lot of some excellent source material, both primary and secondary, on the subject matter. You can try emailing some of the search engines that have these deeply problematic results for how they translate these pieces. And lastly, I'd say you involve the community that has, understandably, a lot of some very strong feelings behind this. Holocaust survivors, I'd say, even more so than the Jewish community. That's a number that's dwindling every day, but there are still Holocaust survivors out there. This is a picture with me and a Holocaust survivor named Greta Elbogen, who had this to say specifically on the subject matter, which is that I do not identify with my suffering. The only way to heal is to grow. We must go on a spiritual journey, embrace life with joy, and help the youth to build a better world and a loving future. If you have any further questions with me specifically, this is my Twitter handle, @Jeff_Kelman. I have open DMs to anybody and everybody to be able to continue to answer questions on the matter. And after that, I'm going to be passing it on to Hari. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was powerful, and I had a chance to interact with Jeff over the past couple of years and realized that he was working on a master's thesis on this topic, so that piqued my interest, and he has a master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Gratz College, so thank you very much, Jeff, for the opening remarks, and we'll get into some of these questions. So next, I would like to welcome Brahmachari Hari from Chinmay Mission, Dallas, and he will be talking about the Hindu-Jain perspective, what we call the Indological perspective.
Namaste and Swasti, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Trivedi. So I'm Brahmachari Hari Chaitanya from Chinmay Mission, a Hindu organization that has over 50 chapters here in North America, and I'm from Dallas-Fort Worth. So the Indological perspective. The swastika is an auspicious symbol not just for Hindus, but in the Buddhist, Jain, and Sikh tradition as well. And we find that this was a widely used symbol for generations and centuries until it was corrupted and the misconception came about. Now I'd like to start by addressing one really important, interesting factor here. In 1893, Chicago did host the Parliament of the World Religions. At that time, there was one young monk from India who attended, relatively unknown, and he secured a spot to speak. And he came up to the podium and he started his speech with, "Sisters and Brothers of America." With that kind of openness and acceptance, the audience leapt to their feet just with that one line, and they clapped for over 8 minutes. What he addressed at that time was, Hinduism around the world was seen, especially in the West, was seen as an exotic, superstitious, very mystical religion without much intellectual backing. What Swami Vivekananda did was gave it that intellectual muscle so that the very view of Hinduism changed around the West. Now, here we are 130 years later, we're still fighting off misconceptions about the religion. Now, I'm not lamenting this fact. I'm just grateful and thankful that we're here again convening, able to openly express these ideas, and able to come to conclusions that make us all better. That's the thankful feeling here. So starting off then, what is the etymological understanding of the swastika? Dr. Kelman went through that. Swasti meaning balance, well-being, and prosperity. Why is that important then, to understand well-being and prosperity? If we look at the Hindu traditions, and there are several of them, but the main crux is that there needs to be integration between this body, mind, and intellect. 3 distinct parts, equipments that I use, all condensed in this little package right here, body, mind, and intellect. Now, whether it's the body, the mind, or the intellect, it has different shades to it, and we call those the gunas. Gunas are shades of that personality. There's sattva, the nature of purity, cheerfulness, knowledge, optimism. There's rajas, the shade of activity, anxiety, emotion. Then there's the shade of tamas, indolence, lethargy, inertia. Now, all three of these shades are important. All three of these shades are inevitable. I can't go to sleep at night if I'm actively with rajas. There's no way I can study and understand anything if I'm overtaken by tamas and inertia. Those gunas are there. But for them to express at the right time, at the right place, under my control, that's the integration I have to come through. And this integration is exemplified through this swastika. Next slide, please. So then, swasti is what that means. Swastika is what? Ka meaning that which gives it that existence is the symbol, one who bestows that balance, that well-being, that prosperity. And we'd be interested to find that swastika not only refers to this symbol in the Hindu scriptures, it's given several other contexts as well. For instance, Surya Bhagavan, the sun god, is also referred to as swastika in the Hindu scriptures. For what context there? Because Mr. Trivedi mentioned that context matters, words matter. The sun is that thing which showers its light on all without any kind of discrimination. Now, one would object to this. Coming from Texas, I feel like the sun affects us more than it does you all in Chicago here. I kind of don't want to go back there because of the heat there. But in essence, the sun does not discriminate about where the sun shines. It spreads its light everywhere. That exemplifies a symbol that bestows equally, without any partiality. That's why it's referred to as swastika. Now, we find another triad here. Mantra, tantra, yantra. Mantra can be likened to that which is a formula, for lack of a better word. It can be a saying, it can be something that is chanted. That is a mantra. Tantra is the technique, with the activity or procedure done using that mantra. What is the technique and to what end? And then there's an instrument as well, the yantra. So swastika serves as that yantra, that instrument of auspiciousness, that which draws my eyes, that which puts me in that understanding to get to that mindset of seeing that purity, of seeing that auspiciousness. So mantra, tantra, yantra. Now we'd be interested to see one other example. Sushruta Samhita is perhaps the world's first manual on surgery and medical procedure. And there are so many instruments for surgery that are looked at in this great text. And Sushruta was one of the world's first surgeons actually conducting brain surgery in those ancient times, where he opened up the patient, did the procedure, closed the patient up, and the patient lived. So far back. Now, there's something called the swastika yantra. What is that? There are over 50 different types of forceps mentioned in this text. And some of them are shaped in the shape of the swastika, where they're used for binding and for putting something back together. Therefore, the term given to it is swastika yantra. That symbolism goes through there again. So for these many reasons, where does the proclamation come in all of this? The proclamation is important because the swastika can be worn on clothing. It's seen in spaces, in temples, in entrances to people's houses. This is a Hindu tradition. But because of the stigma associated with this symbol, because of malfeasance that's spread, because of ignorance that's still around, Hindus ourselves are afraid to express the symbol. Now imagine a few generations back, they understood why they couldn't express it safely, and they didn't. My generation, some of us understand why we can't express this symbol. If this symbol cannot be expressed, future generations will let go of it without any knowledge of why they can't express it, And before we know it, this symbol remains a relic lost in history, having no relevance at all. That would be the worst thing that can happen. Now I'll close with one story that Swami Vivekananda told at the conference he attended 130 years ago. He said there was a frog living in a well, and it was alone in that well, so it would eat all the moss and everything in there, and it got kind of nice and healthy. We don't use the word fat in India, we say healthy is what we say. So the frog became nice and healthy. One day, another frog hopped in, and then he made the introductions. He probably said, Swasti, namaste, who are you? Other frogs said, I'm from the ocean. And this frog said, okay, the ocean, huh? Is the ocean as big as my well? And the other frog laughed loudly also. How can you compare the ocean to this little well here? And this frog got angry. He said, I've never known anything other than this well. This well is my world. You said the ocean is bigger than this well? You must be lying. Get out of my well. And Vivekananda ended that talk by saying, I am a Hindu. I'm sitting here in my little well thinking it's the world. The Muslim sits in his own well thinking it's the world. The Buddhists, the Christians sit in their own little wells thinking it's the world. Now I'd amend that here. I'm not sitting alone in my little well here. On this topic, in this movement that we have, I have a Buddhist, a Native American, an academic, and a Hindu sitting in this little well. But the fact remains that it's still a little well. So what's the point of this panel here and what we can do? Faith leaders from all different traditions here today, let's expand our well. Get into the well with us and let's spread the word that this swastika is not a hateful symbol. And as Mr. Trivedi said, words matter a lot. When we call this a Hindu swastika, and we call the Hakenkreuz the Nazi swastika, as it's been called, that still is not enough. Because we're equating the swastika to that movement, that still gives credence, that still has relevance in people's minds. So a Hakenkreuz is a Hakenkreuz, and a swastika is a swastika. And Mr. Kelvin expressed that beautifully, and I'd say as a Hindu, that's what really gets us forward. Understanding context, spreading that context, and let's rely on each other as sisters and brothers in the same well to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Next, I'd like to welcome Grandmother Patricia Davis. She's a Native American grandmother elder from the Choctaw Navajo tribe nation, and she will give her comments.
Everything in the light is of the light. Beloved community, the whole universe is the essence and substance of love. I greet you, the Parliament of World Religions participants, with a warm heart-to-heart hug from my ceremonial fireplace to the hearth of your homes, the symbol of spiritual, humane, family love. I have people here from the Navajo Reservation, Navajo Nation. Thank you. I will include the Nepazad. Also, all my relatives, you are my spiritual family. And what is good, beautiful, and true is all that I speak. That is the translation of Ya'ate. I'm born of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. For the Tachitni and Kia'ani Authentic Medicine Clan of the Dene Navajo Nation, the original people of Turtle Island. And we are all on Turtle Island. That's North and Central and South America. We call ourselves Dene, holy people. Thus I affirm to each and every one of us, to you, I am a precious child of the holy people. We are all a precious child of Creator within the natural order laws of creation that governs every one of us, all of us, equally. Our spiritual inclusive ceremonial language speaks only in an all-encompassing oneness that we call Hojo. And I am following today our traditional ceremonial sequencing, an indigenous ceremonial change process. So I'd like to thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your interest and your participation in this Swastika Awareness Coalition panel today. And I'm going to use the art of making distinction. That means it's not dualistic, it's not adversarial. Between the swastika symbol, with a long worldwide history as a universal spiritual symbol, conducive for well-being and a prosperous future blessing. And the distinction of the German word Hakenkreuz, meaning, as you have heard, hooked cross, that was egregiously corrupted by its use in one extremely atrocious, destructive context in Nazi Germany. I'm speaking of how the swastika was inverse in its meaning, where its meaning was inverted to represent its goal of racial purification by fascist military brutality and the systemic annihilation of the Jewish people. And we, as original people of this land too, we have compassion and empathy for that violence and suffering. We call that destructive and death-producing. In 1940, our people, the Neth people, in a document were forced to sign a statement that agreed to say, there was an agreement to not use this symbol. It was forbidden. And to this day, people are still fear-based and acculturated and converted to this misuse of the word. So I invite you to my intentional Child of All Nations Indigenous Wisdom Institute as an open classroom here for systemic level change. As humane beings, Bella Ashlai, the Nahut the Net is holy earth surface people. Bella Ashlai is humane beings. We are now, at this moment, engaging in a reframing ceremony to reframe out of the inverse thinking system where win-lose it's no win for everyone. Win-lose in intention is destructive and death-producing decisions for those outcomes. And I'm going to say that those destructive and death-producing decisions were motivated by hatred, and there were evil consequences that I am naming intentional sorcery to humanity by a criminal mind. A criminal mind is using our thinking for what it is not for. Echozen is holy thinking. This criminal mind is out of ignorance. It is twisted thinking. Deep giz aniya. And it is crazy making. If it's intentional, it's sorcery. Both are the denial of oneness of Hojo, and this denial of oneness is evil, and I will define what I mean by that. From the Deneh Hojo natural order, spiritual law context, evil is defined by the absolute abrogation of responsibility, by violating the original instructions to us, humane beings, for making the greatest decisions for peacemaking in the world, for the greatest number of people. In Western abnormal psychology terms, quote, evil is perpetuated by an ultra-malignant, narcissistic temper tantrum to get one's own way that causes violence and suffering by someone who is addicted to the pleasure of inflicting pain on others. Therefore, let us collectively reframe our thinking to the appropriate use of our thinking as conscience and moral reasoning, which is characterized by very simple. Win-win, we all win with our genius gift for our collective survival. And that is what I'm calling life affirming. It's constructive and life affirming. For those outcomes into the future, let us deconstruct, let us reframe the inverse will to power that we're currently witnessing at a global world crisis level today. Let us deconstruct and reframe the Hakenkreuz symbol. It doesn't even want to come out of my mouth. Symbol of white supremacy, erroneously called swastika from its derogatory use in history. And let us reframe our holy thinking into the affirmative will to live and will to good and goodwill. Today, we unite in our intention to bring the unifying principles of, this is Horizontal living, and my aunt told me this directly from where I grew up. Living the loving way, Horizontal, living the loving way as a way of life, in alignment within the oneness of the natural order laws that govern all of us equally. You hear that? Our language is inclusive. There's no way, I love to tell people, there's no way it's impossible. We don't say, but not you. There's no way, there's no words to say that. Into the future. Let us collectively collaborate in affirming a more truthful and peaceful world based upon mutual respect and mutual understanding with love, wisdom, compassion, and the spirit of reverence for our sacred self within each of us and within our sacred place in the universe, in balance and harmony just like our in-breath and out-breath, in balance and harmony, with the one supreme soul of serving in the world, with our unique knowledge and our genius gifts as way showers of love and peace. From the indigenous lens, we are all born in spiritual holiness and wholeness. We are a spark of divinity with inherent sovereignty, not man-made, appointed, political, inherent sovereignty. In the greater light of the perfect peace and love of Creator and creation, synchronistically, for the Diné, the quote swastika symbol is an ancient spiritual symbol used in our Navajo rug weaving tradition throughout many centuries. Most importantly, it is used in our sand painting, our healing ceremonies, to deconstruct and reframe the criminal mind thinking. We call that really simply ika, to lift off physical body ailment with the power of alignment with our true spiritual identity. And each of us is of the earth, our physical body, water, fire, and air. And we all exist simultaneously within the environmental earth, water, fire, and air. And what we call Ina, I think you call Akash. And what we call Nazi Lid, you call Antakarana. And what we call Diyin, you call Deva. It is the fundamental basis of equality among all people. White people, white shell. That's red people, turquoise, yellow people, abalone shell, and black people, obsidian or jet. And that's Yoshkai Assam is Bazil, Dichishli Bazil, and Bashani Bazil, respectively. Therefore, we're all born within the sacred circle, in our holiness and wholeness, with our sacred self-identity, with power within us to have power with each other. And that's what eliminates the need for power over. Thus, each, quote, race, we don't understand the word race. Instead, we're all a jewel, a precious jewel. It is vitally important to understand why it is a sacred symbol to us, Diné. It represents the procreative, life-affirming energy we understand as sunwise and clockwise motion of time and seasons, and the natural order laws that govern all of humanity. Ashabikel. This symbol is our whole galaxy. We're existing in this galaxy. And nobody can be outside of or separate from it. We are living in this galaxy upon Mother Earth with Father Sky. Nahasan, Masto, Jonake. We are aligned and we exist within our sacred self in our sacred place in the Milky Way cosmos. This is the affirmative thinking of the American Indian, and specifically the Navajo or Diné people, who are inspired and guided to live in balance and harmony within ourselves and with each other. To devalue and to dehumanize, to destroy people by enemy creation is what I am diagnostically calling an out of balance condition. And we have identified the root cause. I said intentional sorcery. Today is a day we learn to say yes and no appropriately to those outcomes or those consequences for our children and grandchildren and future generations. Today we ask you to correct and reframe your words to convey the accurate ancient meaning of the swastika symbol to its true meaning as a universal, spiritual, sacred symbol conducive to our well-being and the prosperous future blessing of everyone. Thank you, my spiritual family and relatives. Ahya, Shikei, Shidane, Amolso.
Thank you, Reverend. Yes, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tito Nakagaki. He's the author of the Buddhist Swastika, the Hitler's Cross. He's also he comes from a very old Japanese Jōdo tradition, 700 years old. So, and he's also the president and founder of the Heiwa Peace and Reconciliation Foundation, one of the co-founders of the Swastika Awareness Coalition. So,
Exactly.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is TK Nakagaki, and I gave this kind of paper. So, if you have a chance to read it, please do. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I don't have to speak. So this is what I wanted to, read. So, but then, of course, I'm standing here, so I can speak something. But if I don't, my words are not enough, then please, reflect. This one, at least this is also I made too. So this is really the short version of this book. But of course, this has a lot, much more. And the point that I wanted to make is, basically Hakenkreuz and the Swastika is that, in Japan, we made it this way, so we don't mess up. That's one point. That Japan we do use the word manji, although we don't use the word swastika. Because that's a translation. Manji means man as the 10,000. Ji is a character of 10,000. So symbol of 10,000. 10,000 means a lot. So a lot of happiness, blessings, and all those kind of thousands of truth. Also, so something that you really enjoy and make your life, rich. So that's the symbol of this one. So, and in case, have you ever been to Japan? No? Okay. Do you know where this particular symbol flying? This is actually the particular temple. Yeah, if you've been there, I don't know. That's in Yeah, that's in Tokyo. Yeah, Asakusa. Asakusa is one of the visiting place a lot of people visit, and you see this. But it's a big one. It's like much bigger than this flyer. The banner that we have, and so it is a big symbol. But it's just right then. But for Japanese people, I don't see anything. Just pass it. But even people don't know. Interesting thing is, when I research it, I ask, where can I find the swastika? Because Japanese people has been, we've been using a swastika for 1,400 years. So, if you go to the temple, you should be able to find it. That's the answer. Because the swastika represents the Buddhist temple, basically. So, which means, if you go to the temple, you should find a swastika somewhere. So that's like the knowledge that people have. But at the same time, one thing is very important to be able to make a distinction: manji versus Hakenkreuz. In the Japanese words, again, the manji means swastika, and then Hakenkreuz is of course, the German language, like a Japanese way of saying Hakenkreuz. Well, we also say Kagijuji, which is a hooked cross. So that's why when we refer to the German, things, then that's the Hakenkreuz and but the particular one. When you refer to the Japanese Buddhist temples and so forth, that's a manji. So that's why we don't mix it. But then
it's a simple thing. You don't want to mix with my favorite example was stolen by the Jeff. sugar and salt is one thing that I thought was very interesting for me. That you don't want to mix with that when you bring the coffee. It says, well, it's similar to the the shape, similar, color is similar, so you put this, salt and pepper, not pepper. Sorry, I'm getting a little tired. Salt and sugar together. I mean, it's a difference. I mean, you can tell the difference. I mean, you don't want to mix those things. It's a simple thing, right? So why not to be able to do? I mean, we're not asking so many difficult things, as if this is very difficult, but yet, we make distinction that way. And then also one of the things is the proclamation is one of the reasons that we all, decide to, create it. Because first, where we stand is very always important. When we have a mission statement and so forth, you want to know, you have to tell people where we stand. So this is actually a mission statement, like the one who care for the swastika. We do use this symbol for a long time. So this is where we stand. And then we try to have an agreement how we can present this. And then so this is a statement. I hope you can take a photo later, going closer to the poster there. Or you can go to the website also. And then so that particular statement is very important. Every time when we start doing this, we have to try to answer the side of the Western side of it, So we always say, oh, this is whatever the Western newspaper said is wrong or something, corrected all those things. But probably we need to have such statement like where you stand, where we stand. And so that way we could have a more dialogue. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book is actually the dialogue, because if you don't, swastika is so there's no book could be written, because even this book, how long does it take to even publish this kind of book? Actually I finished this things at 2012. So, but then that's published 2018. In Japanese, I published 2013. Why it takes that, because swastika in this country has to be bad. You can't say swastika is a good symbol. That's why. And so, and then so there's many obstacles that way. We have common sense here, how we say it should be this and should be that. So in a way, this is a book that you can read it and then you can have an exchange and different view. You try to understand different points. And so this dialogue is very important. And swastika this is interesting in one way, because this is considered as extremely bad symbol. And then on the other side, and in the West, the extreme bad sign or bad symbol, and in the East, it's an extremely good sign. And so when the good and bad is meet, when those symbols meet, what can you do? That's a challenging thing too. So then you can open up the conversation. Some people say, oh, they close their ears, then there's no conversation. But since this is an interface, the Parliament of World Religion, this is a place that we should have an open dialogue with. And we try to understand others' point. So that's why I thought it was very important to bring this kind of issues and discuss about it. But anyway, that time is up. So I thank you very much for. And so.
Yes, wonderful. These resources are available, including his book. The link to the Amazon is on our website, understanding-swastika.org, so you can check it out. There are other resources. Jeff Kelman's paper, his master's thesis, is also available on the website. So please do check it out. So we have about approximately 14 minutes. If you have any questions, I think some folks have put them on index cards. So Deepalaji, if you want to bring over the index cards, if you want to collect them from anybody. And we'll continue the dialogue outside once it's done. If you have we're collecting it on index cards. Oh, they didn't? Okay, well, I guess we didn't hand them out on time. Okay, so actually, Deepalaji, we're going to run out of time because people are going to write them. So my suggestion would be, is if you can come up to the podium, it'll be easier for, I'm not pointing, sorry, the mic here, there's a mic here.
Good afternoon. I think a simple analogy could be the symbol of a cross is a sign of Christianity. The symbol of a burning cross is a sign of the Ku Klux Klan.
That's right, thank you. And that's exactly the type of context we use because words and context matter. So please, go ahead.
Hi, so my name is Luke Babb. I'm here on behalf of the Troth this year, which is a inclusive heathen organization. And we have had in the past a very strong stance against using the swastika because we are a pagan organization that deals with pre-Christian Germanic traditions. And while this symbol does show up in our work as a sun wheel, we also have a large problem with heathens who are white supremacists and who use that symbol actively in their spirituality as a way to hide the Hakenkreuz. And so that's a really complicated situation. I was wondering if the panelists had any sort of insights as to how to navigate that respectfully.
So, Jeff, you want to start?
I could say something to that.
Yeah, just pull up the mic.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your question, and it's a really interesting one. I think that and part of my research took me to far more than just the Hakenkreuz and the swastika. There's the Triskelion, there's the Philbot, there's like, there's the three-legged versions. There's the so there's so many other symbols that are derivative of this similar style, but again that are oftentimes born out of very different origins. And the thing is, this symbol is so ancient, right, that it's really difficult for us to say with clear, definitive assurance that we know, okay, well, it's a sun symbol, or it's this, or it's that, or it's a galactic whirling piece. I mean, there's so many different interpretations of its origins. I think to the nature of your question, though, I would just really push to the. I guess this is kind of an underlying thought behind a lot of my thinking here. So my mom is an economist, and so I oftentimes think about this in terms of the real-world effects of actually, what sort of policies we put in place here, and not necessarily our, positive intentions. We might have positive intentions to control for one particular use or not, but if instead that perhaps then, energizes some of the elements within, your heathen base there to, use something slightly different, but still nefarious, then I don't think we've necessarily protected anybody. And if anything, we've actually, again, for lack of a better term, I'm just using the same word over and over, energized this one group there. So I would just be careful with how we try to put controls in place there, but at the same time, involve all of your community members, keep them, keep the conversation very open to what some people might be trying to do, because at the same time, you obviously don't want to, encourage bad actors. But there is some nuance there for sure. And I don't know if anybody else wants to comment.
Yeah, one thing is I was also concerned about those things when I write this book. This is very controversial book in one way, and but then when I have writing, the what's her name, Greta Erbogen, who is the survivor of the Holocaust survivor, basically, and then she gave me the one book by the Rabbi Nachman of Brest. And but anyway, in that there is many actually encouraging words. I mean, simple words, but yet it's very encouraging. So, such as the highest peace is the peace between opposites. If you remember this. The next time you meet someone who makes you uncomfortable, instead of heading for the nearest exit, you will find the ways for the two of you to get along. And then the other one is like to be a person of truth, be swayed neither by approval nor disapproval. Work at not needing approval from anyone, and you will be free to be who you really are. And then the other one is like, this is too. Sorry, the truth is a light by which to find your way out of darkness. Turn it on. If you believe that you can damage, then believe that you can fix. If you believe that you can harm, then believe that you can heal. I mean, very simple, but yet it's very, very encouraging for me.
Thank you very much. Next, please.
Yes, thank you. I was very interested, I didn't get your name.
Jeff Kelman.
Jeff Kalman. I was very interested in your representations of the swastika in pre-Nazi American culture. I was wondering if you were aware of the use of the swastika on the Baha'i temple in Wilmette, which you might want to research.
Do you have a question about it? Or
Well, no, as a Baha'i, I have struggled with, when I show people the temple, trying to explain why there is a swastika, which now I understand is a swastika, but it is not a hoop cross, which I will be careful to use the distinction in the future, because no, I think you cannot imagine any more group more diametrically opposed to the Nazis than the Baha'is. And so people are very shocked, but the designer of the temple, this was pre-Nazism that he designed the outside design.
No, and thank you. I think you also mentioned the hooked cross there. I see sometimes people go back and forth with their usage.
Right.
I encourage trying to kind of, words are difficult enough to change into what we use here, but I think it is possible to change our thinking academically, scientifically. I mean, Pluto was once a planet. Now it isn't, right? So we can change these sorts of things if we are conservative about it. The fact is that I think using the word Hakenkreuz is an important word to settle on because of the German connection it keeps in place. While there is that, there is a Christian connection from the Nazi eyes. Understandably, the Christian community wants to distance themselves also from this. And I think the most historically accurate term there is Hakenkreuz. But speaking further to your points, there's no doubt that the swastika, Canadian in these shapes, are absolutely ubiquitous all over the world. And there's probably thousands of examples that I haven't personally studied just because of how absolutely universal it really has been. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the word swastika is essentially only used by certain traditions. And so that's really important to keep in mind. So while some other tradition may call it, the Native American tradition, they don't call it particularly swastika. Right? There's a different word. In the ancient African tradition, it's a different word. So when we use the word swastika, the word itself means that which is good. So every time we're calling a symbol of hate, by using the Sanskrit word, we're actually calling it a symbol of good. So my point is, that's where the words and context really matter. So that symbol, which is used on synagogues, spray painted on cemeteries, things like that, that should be called Hakenkreuz, because that symbol, the context comes, the entire load of the context comes from a very particular hateful usage. And we have to associate the hate where it belongs. And that's really important for us. And that's one of the reasons why we have this continued conversation. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Just super quick, just one added point to that, which is that, so if we're using words here, it's complicated enough sometimes with the education that goes into this. There's manji, there's wan in Chinese, there's lots of other words for the positive one. However, swastika, even as the Sanskrit derivative word, was used in all the English-speaking Commonwealth and otherwise nations prior to its negative association. So I think even though that has a Sanskrit base, it makes sense to have those two usages, and then of course Canadian for just the shape term.
I'm also speaking as my colleague Luke spoke a little while ago, and I want to thank you first of all because this excellent work that you're doing for all of you, we hope will benefit us too, those of us for whom this is a meaningful symbol, but for which it's very difficult to use it in our environment. The other thing I wanted to say was, one of the things that really struck me was seeing photos of this shape drawn on prehistoric burial urns, where cremated remains in Northern Europe. And wondering from a spiritual point of view, what did this mean to them? Why did they paint it on the burial urns? And so one of the reasons I wanted to come here was to find out, what does this mean to people around the world? And especially when you mentioned the connection with the sun, and the sun deity and the sunwise walking. They also worship the sun deity, and there are images all around the rock paintings and so forth with swastika shapes. So I wonder, this has enriched my understanding of what this symbol might have meant to European people many thousands of years ago.
There's a longer conversation to be had on that, but if anybody wants to give a 30-second reply to your grandmother, it's a very important point that we could discuss offline.
I'd like to be in touch with you, yes.
Please go ahead.
I need to say this to everyone. We don't have a word for evil. I just mentioned that it was in the creation story, how did it originate? Someone threw this temper tantrum to get their own way. So we're saying that nobody who does that and violates spiritual law has no power over the whole creation and the creator. Nobody has power over that. Do we get it here? Like humans, we don't have power over the creator and creation. We're governed by those laws equally. That's why we don't have a word for evil, because created the symptoms, and the symptoms reinforce the belief, and the belief reinforces the symptoms, and then people act out.
That's fine, thank you. We'll continue to the sorry.
My name is Parveen Chopra. I'm a journalist, and somebody mentioned, I think Jack mentioned self-censorship, and then they mentioned that the Native Americans, they abandoned their own symbol. I have another example. This is the Jain symbol with a swastika. Okay, now the Jaina, which is a federation of Indian American Association
Jain
Association, they changed the symbol to this. They removed the swastika, kept the rest of the thing in about 1975. And I found this reference in the pluralism project of Harvard University, that keeping in mind the sentiments of the Americans, because Jaina organization exists of Jains in America, so they changed the symbol. Now, I have one short personal story.
What's your question? I read that, but
I'll come to the question.
No, we have to, because we have to be kicked out of the room. That's why. So if you have a question, please go ahead.
First, I want to say thank you very much for your comments, because I really appreciate the reclamation and reframing of what you stated on that. It was so beautiful. I wanted to ask a question about if the Native American perspective is included in the website, because there wasn't any examples of their use of the symbol. The other thing that I noticed, and I don't know if this would be useful in the discussion and reframing, is that the Japanese manji is actually the inverse of the Hakenkreuz. Hakenkreuz. And so the arms are going the other way. And maybe in the discussion one could point that out, that might be useful.
So your question is that, basically?
Yes.
Okay, so
could that be useful, or pointing out that it's different and not exactly the same?
So I'll answer that from a very quick perspective, and then I will have them share comments. What we say is it doesn't matter, because in the Hindu, Buddhist, and various traditions, you can see the swastika being in both ways, in different places, in different ways, because it symbolizes different contexts of how in the sacred space of how things are used. So when people say, well, the Nazi, quote-unquote Nazi swastika is tilted, etc., it's not really true. It's the Hakenkreuz. Just keep it that way. It's very simple. Keep it quick. So we have that on the website. We actually run a 2-hour workshop on this entire entire topic. So as Jeff said, we have a little bit of time today, but we will continue the conversation. We're actually running out there, kicking us out of the room. So what I would like to do is take this conversation outside, and we can continue. All right. Thank you all for attending today.
So much.